Thank you very much, and it's great to be here today. It's a real honor for us at Cyberproof to be taking part in this webinar. I know that as a community, people have a lot of knowledge to share, and you know, things are very dynamic and changing all the time. So for us, it's you know, we're really happy to be here and to essentially share some of our thoughts around, you know, the COVID-19. Obviously, that's a major part of our lives now. And what we thought we would do is spend a little bit of time actually taking a few minutes to look at what is the shape of normal, with particularly when we're looking at you know, security and resilience considerations. So we put together a few talking points that we would like to share with you. Now, what I'm going to do is share my screen, hopefully, and we will then get started. Okay. So I think what we're going to do now is just say a couple of words about Cyberproof. Cyberproof is actually a part of UST Global, which is a company that started in India and is based in California. We are a security services, a managed security services provider. We're located here in India. We have R&D facilities and operation facilities in Israel, North America, in France and Spain, and also we have a center of excellence in Singapore. And essentially, we work together with our clients to help them build resilience and to help them manage their security operations, both obviously in the office and out of the office. And essentially, what we'd like to do is go straight into kind of three main topic areas that we thought would be very topical and of interest to the community, the NASCOM community. The first being around, you know, the remote work. What does that actually mean to enterprises from security, scalability, and productivity point of view? We thought it would be very, ransomware is one of the most biggest threats on a day-to-day basis, and we thought we would actually take a look at one particular ransomware and understand what lessons could be learned and best practices. And then we thought we would also talk about this idea of managing vulnerabilities, and what does that mean in terms of getting visibility into what matters the most, and then how do we deal with that on a daily basis. So what I'll do now is I'd like to hand over to Bruce, who's head of our security strategy, to kind of take us through some of both the operational and security issues that relate to the remote workforce. Bruce.
On that, I would like to point out something really important about the current work experience, and that is that it's likely to remain with us for quite some time. In terms of the global pandemic, we're looking at probably the rest of this year. But more importantly, one of the things this has caused is businesses to look at their employee model overall. And as employers realize that they can get productivity out of their workforce and that those people can work from home effectively, there's a big push to not bring people back to the office. There's a huge savings to be had in terms of office space, parking, all the utilities for the offices. And then there's the realization that without that commute, without that daily commute, they're actually getting more productivity out of employees. So a number of organizations around the globe I can say I'm in Northern California, so particularly in Silicon Valley, many companies are announcing their plans to take at least 25% of their workforce and have them work from home permanently. So all of this causes some interesting issues in terms of network performance, cost management, and security. I'll start touching on each one of those. So first off, in terms of performance and user experience, employees at the office typically have a very high quality and consistent work experience based on the network there. They've got high-speed LAN access to the local resources, so high-speed Ethernet, and usually some form of dedicated private line that could be MPLS or nailed up hard private line for remote resources. And typically those networks have quality assurance, quality of service. So the various applications that the users use have QoS associated with them. So video gets priority over bulk data transfers, voice traffic gets prioritized. And they also have predictable latency and jitter, as well as defined routing. And what that means is, again, that you can measure what the latency and jitter will be for voice traffic, video traffic, and you can set up specific routes within that network to ensure best quality of service. There's also a reliable network access, since they have an Ethernet jack at their desk, so they can plug in easily. That changes when employees are working from home. First, the internet access they're using is less reliable, and it's usually shared. So many users have cable modem, DSL, or some form of wireless. But since a tremendous number of people are now working from home and schools have been shut down, you'll find that that shared access has been consumed with other people working from home, as well as people doing online classes, video streaming, gaming, etc. So the performance has diminished. There's also a single point to the internet. So someone working from home typically has one access method to the internet. And even if they had multiple access methods to the internet it'd be on a per system basis, and those multiple accesses can't be shared. Next, the internet gets routed along a hot potato path, essentially, which means that it goes from carrier to get to the destination. And that means that the path from the remote office to the corporate network varies for employee to employee, and it also can vary minute to minute. So that's likely to increase the latency to corporate assets as well as to cloud applications. It also means that there's no consistency in latency or jitter, and this can have a profound impact on voice quality as well as video streaming. There's no QoS over the open internet. So that also means that you can't prioritize one application over the other. There's also backhauling issues. So this is really driven by security. I'll go into that in a minute, but the bottom line is, in order to maintain security, the only way to do that for a remote user is do a captive VPN and have them always backhaul their traffic back to the corporate headquarters or to the nearest data center. So what does that do? That drives a significant increase in the bandwidth that's used at the corporate data center or at the headquarters. And the reason for that is, imagine all of the users that were going out to the internet, maybe using cloud services. They're going out to the internet from the corporate data center or headquarters. That's one stream of traffic. Now all of those users are at home. They backhaul back to the corporate headquarters and then out to the internet. So you essentially double the traffic, but not quite. It actually works out to about 2.1 times the traffic that you had before, based on the VPN wrapper. So you've got an additional 10% overhead. So now if you had 500 megs circuit and you were typically doing 350 meg on that circuit, now your requirements would bump up to closer to 700 meg and you'd be oversubscribed for your circuit. So there can be some cost increases there. Another issue becomes the deployment of VPN concentrators. Having a lot of users, you'll have to deploy these concentrators. Typically, they wouldn't be done in the cloud, so you'd have to install a massive bank of VPN services at the corporate data center or at the headquarters. Howard, do you want to move to the next slide?
Yep. There you go.
Some other issues that come in are security, around security. And the home workforce is a goldmine for malicious actors. Working from their home environment, even if they have a captive VPN, there is that initial access to the internet, and you also end up with them accessing their home environment. That may be where their printer is. So they do have access to a home network. And essentially, if they're working from home and they do have split tunneling, they now have a diminished security capacity. So again, they become a ripe target for hackers and other malicious actors. Employees at the office had high quality and consistent security coverage because it was a consistent single policy across all the users, and usually involved a full stack of security controls. So there's firewall, IPS, URL filters, various types of content filters, antivirus, anti-malware. Again, full stack of services. As soon as they go to their home environment, they lose that. You can't deploy, obviously, that full stack at everyone's home. So you lose some of the consistency and also some of the quality of coverage. As I said before, the only way to maintain that coverage is ensuring that when the user boots up their system, they go into a captive VPN and you've got to block split tunneling. The split tunneling creates a kind of a catch-22 of the work from home model. If you do allow split tunneling, it relieves the bandwidth at the corporate data center, but it creates a major security issue. Firstly, either way, the user can leverage their home network to access the internet, and you eliminate that full stack. Also, if you do allow split tunneling, now the user has both untrusted internet access and corporate network access at the same time, and their system could become a bridge between the two for nefarious actors. The other issue around security is moving from work in the work environment to the home environment creates a shadow IT infrastructure by design. A lot of the users will have a home router and a home network. So now there are other systems within their home environment that may not have as high a level of security as the corporate standard, and those systems may have been compromised, but functionally for the user, those are on the same private network and behind the firewall. So the user doesn't enjoy the same protection from those systems that they would from internet systems, even if you do disallow the split tunneling. And then there's the impact of bring your own device. A lot of organizations have moved to the work from home environment and are allowing users to use their own devices. Another thing is we need to move the access control downstream to the asset and the user, not just the network. And what I mean here is in order to provide a high level of security, when remote users are accessing corporate data centers, they were in the corporate environment before, and you could have high level granular control. As we allow them in from the work from home environment, that full VPN gives them full network access to anything in the environment. Since we know that their systems are less secure in the work from home environment, it's better to have more granular control, which is driving a push towards zero trust networking and ensuring that for every asset that a user accesses, they have granular user-based controls as opposed to network-based controls. This also can create issues for partners, sales, supply chain, and so forth. When you think about the partner access that you have now, often there are VPNs that are set up to those partner offices. Well, those partners have gone to work from home as well. So now you need to manage a way to get them access into the environment. So there are some cloud-based solutions that do provide a good response to this. One of them is Security Access Services Edge, or SASE. It's I could say it's a new cloud architecture model, but actually there are a couple of companies that have been doing this for a few years, well before the pandemic started. So let's take a look at how SASE can address each one of those issues. Howard, if you flip backwards, let's take a different look at those same issues from a SASE perspective. All right, so when we thought about the employees having a high quality experience and losing that when they move from home, some of the things that SASE can offer are this: a QoS enabled cloud-based solution. So what I mean by that is the SASE solution looks like an MPLS network. It's a private network backbone, and users can connect to that from the internet, from their home office, but they connect from the nearest POP. That means they get off of the internet as quickly as possible, connect to the SASE environment, the private closed network, and from there they do have quality of service. And since that initial VPN lights up to the nearest POP, which is usually a fairly short distance, they get quality of service over that short haul, and they don't have to change carriers typically to get to that first internet POP. So they're guaranteed quality of service from the local environment into that backbone network, and then ride that private backbone to the destination, thus ensuring that they do have a consistent routing structure. They do have consistent latency and jitter that's predictable. And again, they do have the quality of service issues. The cost and management issues tend to be reduced, since I don't have to backhaul the traffic to corporate headquarters anymore for cloud-based access or internet access. I can that user's traffic to the nearest POP in the SASE environment, use the full stack of security controls, and then drop them back off to the internet at that local POP. So I eliminate all the backhauling, and I eliminate the doubling up of the bandwidth back to the corporate headquarters. And in terms of the VPN concentrators, all of this is done in the cloud, so we can eliminate the need for installing massive VPN concentrators back at corporate headquarters. I'll drop to the next slide. The other nice feature of SASE is it allows me to take the entire full stack of coverage that I was using at corporate and migrate it into the cloud. So I maintain that firewall, IPS, URL filter, content filter, etc. And I've migrated out to the cloud, so I can now apply it not only for that user going out to the internet, but also for that user coming into the corporate environment. That means that I can do things like zero trust networking, and I can apply that granular user control all the way to that asset. It also means that I can manage the bring your own device environment. So depending on the type of environment, if it's a corporate asset, I can apply one set of controls. If it's a BYOD asset, I can provide a higher level of access control. And I've also bypassed, since I start that VPN at boot, but I enable split tunneling in the cloud, I bypass that shadow IT infrastructure. And the last but not least, I can also apply the same thing for my partners. So when they're working from home, I can give them access to specific applications within my environment with a high level of granularity of control. The one other note that I'd make before I give the floor up is integrated monitoring. And the deployment of a SASE model allows you to have that full stack, but also have all of the events and log events from that environment funnel back into the same SIEM and the same security monitoring that you're using for your enterprise. And that's really key, being able to extend that security monitoring from just the enterprise to include the work from home environment for consistent monitoring, as well as correlation between those two environments.
Great, Bruce. Thank you. That's really really interesting, and well, there's quite a bit of information that you gave over. Really appreciate it, and also because it's late in the day in Southern California. Let's move on and maybe dig a little bit deeper. We said that ransomware has become one of the most widespread attacks that enterprises are experiencing, and I'd like to ask Anand, who works on head of business out of our India operations, maybe to take us through some of his thoughts around ransomware in general, but also the Maze ransomware, which recently made some really big waves. Anand?
Right. Thank you, Howard. Yeah, so it's interesting scenario right now. The COVID has changed a lot of things, and when we are talking about ransomware in particular, it warrants reference in the current scenario because most of the malware attacks ransomware has been one of the major causes, right? Or the major malware that have been used. In fact, 78% of cyber espionage incidents involved malware, and ransomware was number 2 up there. Even if you look at last year, the amount of increase by some estimates is 750% increase in the number of ransomware attacks. That just tells, while we are all battling the COVID, there has been a huge surge in activity in the deep web, dark web, and the kind of cyber attacks, and cyber criminals are highly active, right? In fact, ransomwares have become so common that it no longer features in public media unless there is a high-profile attack. And this Maze ransomware primarily surfaced or was big time in the news because it did attack one of the major large IT companies. So it's based in the US, Cognizant, which has more than around 100,000 employees in India. So if we go back to the history of this malware, it was known as Chacha malware, and its origination is from Russian APT TA2101. It was first discovered in May 2019 on the 29th, right? Now, why this Maze ransomware? Because it has compared to other ransomwares, most ransomwares are a technique used by criminals to ask for ransom. But in this case, right, they did a couple of things. They combined asking for ransom with taking away data and trying to pressurize their attack organizations to give up money. So if you look at what are the attack vectors they used malicious email, most common form of implanting a malware these days. They also used exploit kits like Fallout and Spellover, which exploited a vulnerability in Flash, right, in the Flash player. They also tried to plant or enter the organization through open RDP ports, right? So it's used various techniques to get into, or tactics to get into an organization. Now, once it got into the organization, of course, it stayed steady, really low. It tried to proliferate. It used various hashes techniques to try command and control until they got admin privileges and were able to start encrypting and extract data. So one of the techniques that these guys used was to primarily to pressurize the organizations to make them pay. That is, they extracted public information or private information of the organization and pressurized them to publish it online if they do not pay, right? So they still backups before encrypting. They store data through FTP servers by running commands in PowerShell. They also store data from cloud backups, right? So that was unique. That you first get the data and then encrypt. Most other ransomwares mostly encrypted the hard drive or the machines that they were able to infect, and then ask for a ransom to decrypt it. Well, if we look even from a geographical spec, it did attack dozens of organizations in US and UK, in the Middle East, and also in Asia, right? And it did not segregate between government and private organizations. Well, another very unique feature about Maze was that it took into account what are the machines that it was able to encrypt or infect, right? If it's a home computer, if it's a workstation, if it's a domain controller, whether it's a server, and depending on what it encrypted, it changed the amount of ransom that it asked for, right? So they're definitely getting smart. And basically then they would go about announcing the attack on their official website, official news website. They also published portions of data on the Russian hacker forums, right? Now, why this Maze caught into the news was, again, it attacked an IT company which was well in the news, that is Cognizant, right? So in Cognizant, it stayed low for quite a few weeks. It was there in their network for quite some time. And then it was able to encrypt and steal data, right? So Cognizant had to inform all their customers about the attack, and with the indicators of compromise, they had to, make sure that they do all the damage control. Well, of course, these guys used PowerShell Empire to encrypt the hard drives there. Now, also, well, this what this one did is in COVID-19, it said they're not going to attack healthcare or to make sure that they wanted to stay away from COVID, but they did not adhere to that. They went ahead and attacked one of the vaccine facilities in UK. So pretty big damage there in times that you don't want to be in that spot. And even in India, we are aware of many customers who had faced the Maze ransomware in their organizations. Now, let's look at what do we need to do, right, in order to mitigate Maze ransomware and ransomware in particular. Howard, you could move on to the next slide. Well, I would categorize strategy of an organization into three areas. One is protection, then detection, and then response, right? So, detection, of course, would be particular while you have processes, tools, technologies in place to detect. Detection of Maze ransomware in particular would be, based on the IOCs or the IOAs, the indicators of attack. For particular malware, you got to ensure that you have the rules. You create a rule in your SIEM to catch any malicious activity. So that's from a detection perspective. If your organization gets a kind of attack, but let's talk about prevention. The major chunk. All organizations should take measures to prevent Maze and those kind of ransomwares, right? So if we look at prevention, the first thing is you got to keep your OSs up to date, right, to the latest patch level. You got to block your RDP ports, from accessing to the internet. You got to limit your connections to port 3389 because on your firewall. You should have multi-factor authentication on your VPN. You have to enforce complex passwords for all users to prevent brute force attack. You should consider planning RDP behind your restricted area in a network like a DMZ. You need to ensure that what we call a 3-2-1 strategy for your data protection or data backup, wherein you should have at least 3 copies of your data. You should have 2 different storage data types for the data, which is critical, and you should have at least 1 copy offsite for your critical data, right? So that's from a data protection strategy to make sure that if there's one portion of the data which is encrypted, you are at least have a backup, right? Also, one critical piece for this is the employee awareness for phishing, because phishing again has been widely used even in the case of Maze and in other ransomware, right? So you need to make your employees aware how to spot malicious email, how to respond to it, and where to report it, and also you need to create a sense of urgency in case they see such an attack. Because if one employee is able to spot it, but he does not report it, then there will be other employees who are not as vigilant as as this employee, and that could be an entry point, right? So the employee awareness is one of the major tool or strategy that can be deployed by users. Of course, network segmentation is important to segregate your network into different zones to prevent proliferation of the malware. You got to monitor your network traffic. You got to scan your system backups for the malware infection. You got to disable macros in MS Office. So these are the few tips that you could do to make sure that you prevent your organization from such kind of attacks. And these attacks are very common these days, right? Now, if said the last most important piece is, what do you do for a response? How would you respond to this kind of attack? And that to me is a very important piece, because just in the cyber world, we say either you are attacked or you don't know you are already compromised, right? So the response piece is very critical. Now, when we're talking to response, you got to have your incident response mechanisms in place. You got to have your threat intel the moment something is observed on the dark web, especially for your region or for your sector or your kind of organization. You should have some kind of threat intel feed to make sure that you're being aware, and then you put in the mechanisms to combat those kind of malware attacks. Second is the incident response, right? So, well, incident response is very critical because it could basically make a huge impact upon how soon you detect that there is somebody already entered in your organization, and how quick do you respond to it. Those are the 2 main factors which would determine how do you curtail your loss or prevent a major attack from causing a major impact to your organization, right? And also, when we are talking about response, what I see is we will have to move to automation. There has to be automation to make sure that you automate the response as far as possible using in your security operations playbooks, use cases, and using automated ways of making sure that if there is an attack and it's detected, it does not miss a human eye, and there is an automated mechanism to deal with it. I think that's pretty much what we should do in terms of prevention, detection, and response for a malware, and especially those sophisticated ones like Maze. Right. All right. That's pretty much Howard. Over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Anand. That's really interesting. We certainly, one of the main things that we find when we're working with our customers is actually the need to implement, and you've put this on the slide here of threat intelligence, which is really being able to go out there and proactively look to see if if your organization is potentially under attack or under surveillance, and to be able to become more proactive is definitely a way to mitigate the level of threat. What I'd like to do now is actually move over to very much related topic, and one that I'd like Jamin to address, and that's essentially around vulnerability management. And here it's really about focusing on what matters most, because there's so much noise. There's a famous famous saying is being able to separate the noise from the signal. How do we really find what's most important to be dealing with for your business? So Jamin, let's take it over to you. Just so everyone knows, we do have a few interesting questions. We're going to keep them to the end, the last 10 minutes. So if anyone does actually have any questions, please use the chat, and we will do our best to get to them at the end. If we don't manage to get to you, we will share the answers with NASCOM team, and hopefully we'll be able to share answers via email. Anyway, Jamin, please.
Hey, Howard, thank you. Yeah, so if you go to the next slide, Howard. So let's actually start from how we approach vulnerability management and how we normally focus our efforts in a typical scenario. So as the infrastructure expands into the hybrid model, and in some cases to complete cloud-only environment, organizations are building the ability to proactively detect vulnerabilities and configuration weaknesses within the environment. As the attackers become more organized and attacks become more sophisticated, organizations will have to develop the ability to understand the attack tools, the techniques, motives, and patterns. We must leverage the intelligence data and understand the prevalence of vulnerabilities, exploitability of them, and also understand the availability of toolkits. Yeah, so this is where threat intelligence come into picture. Organizations should also continuously strive to align with legal and compliance regulations. And more importantly, organizations should be able to implement effective threat detection and responsibilities. Now, vulnerability management and threat event enrichment should be an integral part of any organization's cyber defense function. So we'll touch on the importance of vulnerability management and capability of the SOC operations later. So if you go to the next slide, so what you see is the normal scenario have changed. Now the focus is all at remote workers, as you would see. We are in the home, we have work environment, but at the same time, we will also have our kids, our family members using other kind of social media, streaming, and what have you. Yeah. So this is where we need to look at. There are plenty of opportunities for attackers, and we need to be looking at how we can actually shift that focus from a pure siloed approach to a threat-centric vulnerability management model. So Howard, if you just go to the next slide. So what we can start looking at is, we need to start from what are the key factors that influence a shift in approach. So first of all, we should be able to ditch the exercise of trying to patch everything all the time to a focused intelligence-led activity that acts on threats that are real, and also those could cause significant impact to the business. So with increased number of vulnerabilities that are discovered daily, our security team needs to be able to make informed decisions on what vulnerabilities should they address and the ones that they should be able to ignore. Yeah, and that actually faces some challenges, or this is where we need a shift in the approach. So if you look at the first one, the score-based vulnerability management doesn't work anymore. The traditional approach to vulnerability management is very much focused on severity and similar scoring, CVSs, NVD scoring, etc. If you look at CVS scoring, it was created as a simplified way to exchange information about vulnerabilities between different industry stakeholders. It assigns a score between 1 to 10 and attempts to establish an objective measure of a severity at a given vulnerability, or severity of a given vulnerability. It considers a range of criteria such as access vector, the complexity of an attack, authentication requirements that are needed, impact of that particular vulnerability. But if you look at it, CVS score is not a measure of the actual risk. It is a measure of the technical exploitability, and it is different from the actual exploitation and the complexity behind it. So it's not actually taking your environment into consideration, and also the controls that you have implemented in order to protect your organization. It also doesn't reflect the true complexity of the vulnerability, what that vulnerability is actually like. Are there exploits that are available in the wild? How easy is it to execute those toolkits that are available, and much more. The second point is most of the vulnerability scanning tools operate in silos, and can leave blind spots. So if you look at it, vulnerability management tools have several enhanced features these days, but many a times we end up using the basic features that the tool offers. We implement the tool with out-of-the-box configuration and limit the scanning scope. We don't configure them tailored to our threat landscape, and also in line with our attack surface. Also, often we overlook the perimeter and internal network appliances. So those network appliances and stuff is always patched as a very reactive process, and it's not typically included in our normal scanning lifecycle. Also, organizations ignore the modern application development and management tools, containers, microservices, cloud native resources that you would see in the public cloud. So we should be able to identify and categorize all the assets in a hybrid IT environment. This includes on-prem, hybrid, and cloud. We should not only look for assets vulnerabilities, but one major thing that we also need to consider is the configuration weaknesses or control gaps. This is where asset categorization and prioritization also plays an important role. If you look at cloud environment, what we see is that we see more of configuration weaknesses or control gaps than actual vulnerabilities that exist in a cloud resource. What you'll also see is that with the COVID pandemic, organizations are increasingly transitioning into cloud and are really concerned about the security vulnerabilities that comes in the form of configuration weaknesses or control gaps, that gets introduced in the cloud transformation journey. Traditional scanning tools cannot detect such flows, especially configuration weaknesses and control gaps. This is where there are a number of specialized technologies and capabilities available. But in addition to that, solutions like breach simulations is something that we should be looking at leveraging. Also, the security team struggled to keep up with the changes in threats. Every day, new and evolving threats are coming out. You need to understand what does that mean for your organization. How do you really understand the real impact to the organization? This is where we need to start looking beyond our organization and see how this is actually impacting and how our industry peers are doing. We need to understand attacker activity in the wild. We need to be able to understand vulnerability trends, the prevalence of the vulnerability, and also how the toolkits are available for an attacker to use that. There are many solutions that are available in the market that assess this huge data set that is available. You can get intelligence feed information, aggregate all that data, and understand the actual exploitability and the potential risk that these vulnerabilities bring to your organization. Now, let's look at some of the opportunities and challenges that comes with this remote worker mode that we are in now. So when we prioritize vulnerabilities for remediation, we should look at those vulnerabilities that could impact the remote workers more. So for example, any vulnerabilities or weaknesses in the commonly accessed systems or remote access solution is something that we should be prioritizing. This will ensure we have the productivity and continuity for our employees. Availability of systems is very important as well. So when you are actually going to do patching or system upgrades, it needs to be scheduled in an appropriate manner. So without planning and organization, the patching and remediation may not be actually, may not go smooth. For example, we may not have remote access to some of those systems. So for example, in many cases, when we are doing a system upgrade, ideally we would require console access. So with all the situation and lockdowns, we may not be able to get hands-on access to those systems to do some local changes, what have you. So this is where some of this planning, especially when it comes to rollback, we need to make sure that we have planned extremely carefully when making those changes. Another point is regarding endpoints, where when we do schedule scans on endpoints, especially for those endpoints that are used by our end users, the endpoints may have connectivity issues and poor network bandwidth, and end user laptops, for example, may not be online during the scheduled scan times. So this is again something that we need to be looking in very carefully. So the traditional scanning that are based on scheduled scans may not always work in this scenario. This is where we also need to look at capabilities provided by other endpoint security solutions that cover threat and vulnerability information. So for example, if you look at EDR solution, they can help ensure configuration hygiene. They can help manage blacklist, whitelist applications, and also helps deal with malicious files, processes, etc. Which means that these tools can help with systems that are probably not patched and managed to the latest level. Yeah. And Howard, if you just go to the next slide.
Yeah.
So what you see here is typically there are the outer ring, the all known vulnerabilities. So this is probably the total number of vulnerabilities that are completely known to us, and this can be actually in several thousands, even in millions. But if you look at the blue circle, what organizations should always focus on is that the vulnerabilities that are relevant to them. Okay, so that could be potentially in the several hundreds, or in case several thousands. So for us to manage those vulnerabilities, it's actually impossible to manage and maintain and reduce the risk each of those. So this is where we need to look at that threat-centric approach that I mentioned before. So there are three things that we will be looking at. The first one is the critical vulnerabilities. Critical vulnerabilities are those vulnerabilities that have a critical rating that is provided by the standard scoring like CVSS. Yeah. We then need to look at two other important factors which are based on your organization's threat profile and landscape. The first one is the exploitable vulnerability. An exploitable vulnerability means these are vulnerabilities that have a toolkit available This is actually an attacker can use that toolkit capabilities to exploit a particular vulnerability. So these are the POC codes available and actively being used in the wild. The second one is exposed. What exposed means is, if you have a system that an attacker, either that attacker is based outside of your organization or an internal or from a third-party network, if that attacker can reach a particular asset, that means that that asset is exposed to that. So a combination of exploitable and exposed with critical gives you the focus vulnerability list that you need to look at. So you can reduce your several hundreds or thousands of vulnerabilities that you will see in your organization to those handful of them, which could be a few tens that you may want to prioritize that could bring immediate risk and high impact to your organization. So that's the threat-centric, risk-managed vulnerability model. And if you go to the next slide. So how do you look at solving this from an MSSP point of view? So I will look at this in 4 main pillars. The first one being continuous scanning. Scanning not only helps in detecting vulnerabilities, scanning tools can also help with asset discovery, inventory management, and for on-premise, hybrid, and cloud environment. The tools can also gather detailed information about assets, the version of the softwares, any additional software programs that are involved, processes that are running, and more. Yeah. In addition to this, scanning tools will also synchronize with asset inventory, asset management solutions like ServiceNow, configuration management database, and others. So scanning profiles should be configured based on asset category, asset types, and its impact to the business. And we should schedule the scans to be aligned with the organization's business objective and the impact of the asset. So where I'm coming at is we should not only have a leading scanning technology or tool implemented, we should ensure that this is customized and configured to your threat profile and the asset landscape that you have. Then bringing in additional context to vulnerability information is also really important. This helps us to understand and prioritize vulnerabilities based on our threat profile and the risk appetite that we have. So by mapping and visualizing the attack surface of the organization, we can clearly define the asset exposure and the exploitability of the vulnerability. So once we understand the exposure, we can help prioritize the ones that needs to be managed immediately. So if you look at solutions like Skybox, it helps us visualizing the attack surface and provides that intelligent prioritization of vulnerabilities for us. And then the next part is that simulations, where continuous breach simulation exercises help to validate if a particular vulnerability could be exploited or not. It can help validate configuration weaknesses and control effectiveness as well. Yeah. So organizations should also not only look at vulnerabilities and configuration weaknesses, but also need to take an important factor, which is the user behavior and patterns into consideration. So if you look at advanced persistent threats or evasion techniques, those kind of activities monitor for user behavior and user activities to compromise systems and elevate privileges and look at laterally moving within the environment. Also, if you look at an example, an attacker can, who have access to a compromised endpoint, can monitor activities such as a user connecting to a remote system or RDP protocol, and can grab the credentials of that, elevate the privileges, and compromise the remote system and laterally move to that. Okay, so breach simulation exercises can simulate all these different types of scenarios and help organizations to implement a proactive mitigation and effective control mechanism. And if you also look at it, manual breach simulation exercise often is time consuming, and it can also be expensive because of the highly skilled resources involved. Also, there are a number of different solutions that are available that can help with automating these breach simulation activities. Finally, remediation of vulnerabilities. It's again in a timely and effective manner is extremely important. So upon prioritization of vulnerabilities, the security team should decide what is the appropriate solution to mitigate that. Whether it's deploying a patch, upgrading a system, implementing a rule on the firewall, or configuring a detection rule on IPS, for example. Yeah. So as part of the remediation process, organizations should be able to look at building effective remediation workflow, orchestrating different tools, technologies, providing a holistic approach, and automate those. And that's really important. How do you take these different workflow scenarios and make it automated so that you bring that efficiency and proactive control over that? So this means that prioritized vulnerability can be pushed through change management process into customers' ITSM tools and patch management tools to push specific patches, monitor that, and also kind of provide you with a validation of that particular issue has been mitigated. So in order for all those 4 pillars to kind of work harmoniously, I would say you have to have a solid vulnerability management operational process with governance framework installed, so that all those 4 kind of pillars and capabilities can be synchronized and work effectively. So to wrap this up, we have to, in order to build an effective cyber defensibility, organizations should be able to integrate the vulnerability management program into their SOC, as part of the cybersecurity event monitoring and responsibility. A mature SOC should leverage a use case driven approach and build the threat detection rules based on specific vulnerability patterns and attack behaviors. So we should be able to have a very specific set of use cases that can help us detect any activity that are pertaining to the vulnerabilities that are actually trending or prevalent in the wild. And finally, to ensure the visibility, we should look at building informative reports and dashboards that are tailored for specific stakeholder groups, continuously to keep them informed on various stages within our vulnerability management lifecycle. So that's just a quick view on how we would approach vulnerability management. So thanks.
Great, Jamin. Great, thanks, Jamin. And we, I know we're almost at the top of the hour. I'd like to. There are a couple of questions that came in, so let's see if we can quickly handle them. So okay, so the first question that came in was actually a question for Bruce. How quickly can we install the SASE solution, and how are the security parameters? Are they covered within the solution, or are they configured elsewhere?
The solution itself takes about 3 minutes to install for the user, and the security can be configured in the SASE solution in the cloud in about an hour. Okay,
well, that's okay. Great, thank you. I'm assuming that obviously there's some differences between suppliers, but I certainly, you're saying from the experience that you've had in terms of implementations, with customers that you've had discussions with.
Yes.
Okay, great. Another question. How relevant are the mitigation measures you spoke of when data is hosted in the cloud? Was that a question that came up for you, Bruce, or was it Anand?
I think for me, and I think it's even more relevant in that, say, a company is headquartered say in Trivandrum. And the cloud services are in Azure West in the US. The network, the typical network, even when the workers were at work, goes out to the internet and then traverses the ocean on the internet. This solution would give the users the ability to hit the private network and get MPLS-like routing all the way to the doorstep of those cloud services. So they'll actually see better performance when they move to the SASE model.
Okay, great. Thanks. Another one, I think, here for Anand. Could you just give a little bit more details around? You mentioned it in one of your slides, the Yara rule. Can you give a little bit more detail around that?
Sure. Yara rule are basically, it's an open source tool which if there is a malware, it's being studied by security researchers, and they study the strings and the binary. And then it's like a C language tool where you write in the rules identifying those binaries and strings, and that's used by many organizations which have tools like Micro or FireEye and other organizations to equip their tool to identify such malwares.
Okay,
and you could have Yara rules in your SIEM. You could write Yara rules in your SIEM as well.
Okay. Do we have time for one more question? I'm asking our hosts from NASCOM.
Yeah. Yes, Howard, you can. Yeah.
Oh, great. Okay. One more question here. Maybe Bruce or Jamin, you could handle this one. How does Cyberproof detect zero-day attacks like the ransomware that we discussed? Someone want to pick up that one? If not, I will.
Yeah. No. So I think so. This is always like a question that we get when we speak to customers as well. So right. It's actually so it's also really vague, and the way that we should be looking at is first of all the SIEM technology that helps us do correlation is based on taking data from a number of different sensors. So one of the ways that we will be able to understand if there is something suspicious going on would be to look at from a behavioral point of view. What is normal and what is the deviation from the normal. So the biggest problem with zero-day, as we all know, is that we have no idea what bad looks like. So the only way that we will be able to understand that there is something would be to, first of all, have a clear view of what a normal looks like for an organization. And there are, if you look at for each different kind of environment, whether that be network, whether that be endpoints or user, there are behavioral analytics capabilities and tools that are available. So the signals and data from these solutions can bring together into a SIEM. We have a capability which we call the use case factory that actually helps us to create these specific rules and use cases to understand baseline what obviously a normal scenario looks like, and then looks at those patterns or those events that kind of deviates from the normal. Okay, so that helps us pick up what that is, and then using our skilled analysts and resources, we can investigate those further, bring in additional context and data from other sources, whether that be vulnerability management that we discussed, or threat intelligence and other information to really understand and get to the bottom of what that particular issue might be.
Great, Jamin. Thanks for that. We kind of are pretty much out of time. I hope that was useful, and we were able to share some of our knowledge and experience in the field. Clearly, this is going to be an interesting period for all of us, and certainly anyone that wants to secure their operations or secure their data or people. This is going to be these subjects are going to be very topical and top of mind for any security professionals. Just one final thing. We do run webinars, and we actually have them posted either on our website, cyberproof.com. We also have them posted up on YouTube. If you are interested and would like to see some of the other subjects that we've been presenting, please feel free to visit our sites. That's all we have for now. If any further questions come up, please feel free to reach us via the NASCOM team. Thank you, and have a good day.